Vladimir Putin's nightmare is coming true. The winds of the war in Ukraine continue to blow on Russian soil. One of Putin's biggest fears was that the war he started would spread to his own country. The effects of the Ukrainian war are felt more and more in the depths of Russia. The Kiev fighters seem determined to carry their successes on the front lines to the Russian border. Since the beginning of the war, Ukrainian forces have repeatedly conducted offensive operations against Russian cities close to the borderlines. These included cities such as Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod, especially Bryansk, which is located at the westernmost tip of Russia and shares a border with the northeastern tip of Ukraine, is at the focal point of the attacks. Cases of treason and espionage are on the rise in Russia. Moscow tightens its laws against sabotage, but measures have been failing to stop a large number of attacks in recent weeks. Explosions that derailed trains, cut power lines, and mysterious fires. The increased sabotage actions in Russia this week overshadow the preparations for the May 9th World War II Victory Day, the most important celebration of Moscow. President Vladimir Putin has sought to portray Russia as a safe and stable country, as soldiers have been fighting in Ukraine for over a year and the death toll has risen. Russian officials tried to recruit more men to replenish the weakened ranks. Authorities tried to reassure those at home that the conflict was distant and did not pose a threat to Russian soil. However, a series of explosions in recent days reminded that Russia was also exposed to enemy blows even hundreds of kilometers away from the Ukrainian front. Let's dive into the details of the explosions in Russian cities. Local authorities reported that an explosion occurred for the second time in 2 days after a freight train derailed in the Bryansk region on the border with Ukraine. Regional Governor Alexander Bogomazov stated that an explosive device exploded near the train station in Znamenskaya, about 96 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Bogomazov stated that the explosion did not cause any death or injury. In the statement made by the train operator Russian Railways, it was reported that a locomotive and about 20 wagons were derailed. Russian Railways stated that about 100 meters of railway tracks should be replaced about 330 ft immediately after the explosions. A fire train was dispatched to the scene. However, the first videos of the train derailed on the internet did not show any flames. It was not immediately clear what the train was carrying. The governor made no specific charges for the explosion in which 2 trains derailed. Kiev maintains an overall policy of strategic uncertainty regarding attacks on Russian territory. Ukraine also did not take responsibility for the explosions. The previous derailment occurred as a freight train from Belarus passed through the Bryansk region near the town of Uneka, about 96 kilometers east of the Ukrainian border. The explosion was the last blatant sabotage attack to occur in Russia. 8 of the train's 78 cars were derailed after an explosive device was detonated. The derailed wagon caught fire, closing the traffic on the line. Ribber, an influential pro-Russian military blog, posted a video on Telegram showing cars burning. Rybar noted that the wagons carried petroleum products and timber. Explosions in Russian cities are incessant. Earlier this week, another explosive device damaged power lines in a forest south of St. Petersburg. The FSB security service described it as an act of sabotage. In addition, in the last 5 days, 2 fuel tanks caught fire in and around the Crimean peninsula. A Russian official reported that an oil depot near the strategically important Kerch Strait Bridge, which connects Russia with Crimea, burned down in the early hours. Veniamin Kondratiev, the governor of the Krasnodar region, said on his Telegram channel that an oil storage tank caught fire in the village of Volna, near the port of Taman. Volga is Russia's only land link with the illegally annexed peninsula of Crimea. Volna is located near the Kerch Strait Bridge, an important supply route for Russian forces amid the ongoing war in Ukraine. The latest fire came days after Russia blamed Ukraine for another fire at an oil depot in the port of Sevastopol. The fire started around 2:30 am Moscow time. It was claimed that the fire was caused by an unmanned aerial vehicle belonging to Kiev. Videos of the fire spread rapidly. Leon, Russian and Ukrainian social media video footage showed a large flame and a large black smoke rising into the sky. Anton Gerashenko, one of the advisors of the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, shared a 28-second video on social media platforms. Gerashenko suggested that the fire may have been part of Ukraine's preparations for the upcoming offensive. Gerashenko stated that weakening Russia's logistics is important for counterattack operations. Alexei Oreskovich, who served as an advisor to the Ukrainian presidency until he resigned in January, claimed earlier this week that Kiev's counterattack would target the Kerch Bridge. The days in Crimea never returned to normal. Explosions and fires raised tensions in Crimea. Every minute before the explosions in the village of Volna, the port city in Crimea was also shaken by a series of explosions. The oil storage facility with a capacity of 40,000 tons in the city of Sevastopol was hit by unmanned aerial vehicles. A bright explosion turned night into day in Sevastopol, then darkened the sky as a Russian fuel tank burned during the day after a Ukrainian drone strike. The reported kamikaze drone attack set several fuel storage tanks on fire at a large fuel terminal at the western end of Sevastopol. The complex in Kazanka Bay formed a rising cloud of black smoke before it burned, leaving behind charred tanks and pipelines. Moscow's appointed governor of Crimea, Mikhail Rostov-Sev, made a statement on his Telegram account stating that 2 drones caused the fire. Preliminary information TASS news agency reported that the fire covered approximately 21,500 ft. According to Osmayev, there were 60 firefighters trying to control the fire. However, the fire was brought under control about 14 hours after it started. Governor Rosvozchev also stated that no one was injured and those living nearby would not be evacuated. Roswell's Hajiyev added that the fire will not affect the refueling situation in Sevastopol. Also, video from a drone used to investigate damage to the facility shows multiple fuel tanks being completely destroyed. In the images, it's observed that some tanks that do not burn themselves have serious thermal damage. The damage appears significant and likely jeopardizes plant operations in the near future. Whatever the potential impact on operations, no Russian supply officer would want so much fuel and infrastructure to evaporate. The problem is not the fuel lost, but the loss of the ability to conserve large amounts of fuel in the future. The Ukrainian Armed Forces announced in a statement that the attack on an oil reserve in the Russian-annexed region of Crimea is part of preparations for the upcoming spring counter-offensive. On the other hand, Ukraine can counterattack at any moment considering this possibility. Russia is increasing its measures. In addition to strengthening its defense lines, Moscow is canceling its important celebrations. The May 9th parades have also been cancelled in more remote Russian regions outside of major cities near the Ukrainian border. For now, the main parade on Red Square in Moscow will still continue. The main challenge for the authorities is to ensure that everything goes smoothly. The parade, broadcast all over Russia and demonstrating the military might of Moscow, is the main event of the year and is crucial to Putin's legitimacy. The parade often gathers crowds who come to watch the tanks and soldiers marching through Moscow with their families. Since coming to power in 2000, Putin has promoted a cult of patriotism that was used to fuel patriotism around the Soviet victory over the Nazis in 1945 and boost his legitimacy as the heir to the Soviet power. It seems that Ukraine's offensive operations have not only affected Russian cities. These operations also undermine the prestige of the Russian leader. We will wait and see what the Russian leader's reaction to Kiev's operations will be. The biggest news is coming from the Donetsk region. Here, after losing almost all armor and half of the brigades, Russian Marines were ordered to launch another offensive on Volodar. This order was likely the last straw because Russian Marines refused to fight and follow orders from their commanders. Other battalions deployed to Volodar started writing as well and forced the Russian Ministry of Defense to use tough measures and send Rosgvardia in response to the mutiny. Last time I told you that in the aftermath of the battle for Volodar, almost the entire Russian elite naval brigade was destroyed and Russia lost 130 units of heavy equipment, including 36 tanks. I also told you that due to the extensive losses of armor, Russians became only capable of attacking with infantry. The freshest reports suggest that Russians are engaging in low-intensity positional fights. Ukrainian commander Dmitrievsky confirmed that Russian forces are increasingly conducting assaults without armored support, and that sometimes when they do engage armored personnel carriers, they just drive infantry to the front line for dismounted assaults and then withdraw. A Ukrainian soldier fighting in Volodar stated that Russian forces conduct assaults in small groups of 10 soldiers or fewer, but are largely on the defensive in the area. Ukrainian intelligence reported that the Russian 155th and 40th Naval Infantry Brigades have merged into one brigade because of significant losses. Ukrainian intelligence also reported that Russian Defense Minister Shoigu instructed Eastern Military District Commander Muradov to take Volodar at any cost. Shortly after that, some information started emerging that the Russian 155th Naval Infantry Brigade refused to conduct offensive operations in the area and that Russian forces had also lost control over an irregular Cossack battalion formation. This information was later confirmed by Ukrainian General Staff. This is not surprising because this would be the third large-scale suicide operation for them. Russian forces have reportedly reconstituted the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade at least 7 times since the start of the invasion, and it was refilled with the newly mobilized soldiers several times. The fact that naval brigades were merged suggests that at least half of them are dead, and if you also consider that they were refilled 7 times, then apparently the number of the remaining elite troops is likely below 10%. In response to the refusal to fight and in attempt to prevent other personnel from rioting, Russian forces deployed Rosgvardia in the region. Shortly after that, the Russian Minister of Defense, Shoigu, visited the regional commander Muradov for the purpose of evaluating the situation around Volodar. He likely saw that the use of squad-sized assault groups and significant Russian personnel and equipment losses in previous assaults would constrain Russian forces from securing any significant gains in the Volodar area because later he ordered to transfer additional reserves of manpower and equipment for renewed offensive operations. Several days ago, locals reported that Russians were transferring a lot of equipment through Mariupol and Bryansk. Ukrainian Mariupol mayoral advisor confirmed that Russians moved 28 pieces of equipment, accompanied by 6 civilian cars with luggage and trailers. He said that most of them had the manpower. He added that Russia is also building up forces at barracks and settlements on roads leading to frontline positions, and that Russia had brought an extra 10,000 to 15,000 troops to Mariupol and its outskirts. He noted that Russian forces reportedly have 30,000 troops in the greater Mariupol area. 2 days later, Ukrainians conducted an extensive fire missions primarily targeting the areas of forces concentrations, but also equipment because repelling mechanized assaults from such a small town as Volodar is very difficult. Ukrainian head of Melitopol reported that Ukrainians conducted a hammer strike and destroyed Russian bases in the vicinity of the city, one in the northern part and one in the southern. The next day huge explosions were reported in Bryansk, which is exactly where Russian columns were headed. Overall, Russian assault units deployed in Volodar were depleted to the point where Russians had to merge brigades together to make a full one. The morale of Russian soldiers is so low in this region that they refuse to launch another offensive operation. After investigating the Volodar case, the Russian Ministry of Defense urgently started taking action to restore the combat capability of this group, primarily by relocating additional troops in the region. In the meantime, Ukrainians exploited the opportunity to destroy several Russian bases with the newly arrived forces who were temporarily concentrated in one place. One of the most important developments in the Russia-Ukraine war is undoubtedly fires since the day Putin started his invasion of Ukraine. The number of fires in Russia with unknown causes has been increasing. These fires usually occur at military points and official buildings belonging to the invaders. Considering the location of the fires, war commentators make predictions about the cause of the fires. It is assumed that the fires, which caused huge losses for Russia, were initially set by Ukrainian sabotage and partisan groups. Sabotage and partisan groups, which quite the organized operations for Ukraine on Russian territory, have had a major impact on the Russian-Ukrainian war. In addition, another group that comes to mind as the cause of the fires is the anti-occupation Russian public and Russian youth who do not want to take part in the occupation of Ukraine. This is because the severity of the fires increased even more with the mobilization order announced in the first year of the war. The Russian people do not want to die for Putin's personal interests. Therefore, the Russian people may be burning military posts and official buildings in Russia in order to make Putin give up the occupation. Another suspect in the fires in Russia is the Russian oligarchs. The oligarchs who are preparing for the post-Putin administration in Russia may burn various points in the country to harm Putin and prepare the ground for his resignation. All these comments and allegations show that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is full of problems. These problems Putin is experiencing are increasing day by day, so much so that a fire broke out in Moscow, the capital of Russia, recently. This fire occurred in the building of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Moreover, the ministry building was very close to the Kremlin, and Putin was hosting Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko in the Kremlin during the fire. The cause of the fire, which broke out in the evening, has not yet been announced. A Russian news agency reported the fire with the following sentences at around 7:30 p.m. In one of the administrative buildings of the Defense Ministry in Moscow, officials detected smoke in the building. The fire brigade and emergency services arrived on the scene. Thousands of social media users shared images of the fire that broke out and the Russian Defense Ministry building on Moscow's Namenka Street. In the shared images, the dark clouds rising from the ministry building are clearly visible. After the fire in the Ministry of Defense building, the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations sent its teams to the region. Dozens of fire brigades intervened in the fire, along with search and rescue teams in the region. According to Russian sources, there were no casualties or injuries as a result of the fire. 50 people in the building were evacuated. The time and place of the fire is very significant because the building that caught fire in Moscow is an important building known as the Paxton House, built in 1987. The fire is believed to have started in the military property section of the Russian Ministry of Defense building, which deals with facilities across the country. However, the time of the fire is also very important. The fire broke out when Putin was meeting with Lukashenko. Hours before the fire broke out in the Defense Ministry building, Russian leader Vladimir Putin had met with 17 new ambassadors to Moscow. Among these diplomats was the new Russian ambassador to Washington, Leon Tracy. Russian leader Vladimir Putin blamed the West in his meeting with the ambassadors. Putin claimed that Western intelligence agencies were organizing terrorist attacks on Russian soil. According to Putin's statements, the Western intelligence was working with the Ukrainian sabotage and partisan groups. Putin claimed that Western intelligence was supporting the actions of these groups. He therefore warned all ambassadors to react more strongly. The fires that broke out in various regions of Russia dealt a heavy blow to Putin because these fires are not limited to areas belonging to the occupying army and buildings belonging to official institutions. In Russia, fuel depots, natural gas and oil pipelines are the main areas that are on fire. Putin was able to resist the sanctions imposed by the West and European countries through the supply of natural gas, and oil is losing this power one by one. The explosions in pipelines and fuel tanks seem to be preparing the end of Putin. Russia's defeat against Ukraine is now clearly visible. The Russian media is trying to hide this fact, but without success. Even Russian citizens and former Russian commanders are calling the Russian media liars. Igor Girkin, former Minister of Defense of the Donetsk People's Republic and an officer of the Russian Federal Security Service, said that the Russian media is hiding the truth about what is happening in Ukraine. This behavior of the Russian media harms Russia, Girkin said. It has a very negative impact on the situation in the whole country, in our entire state. Aware of the realities of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the former Russian commander, Girkin, said that Putin is regressing day by day and that the Russian army will lose the war at this rate. Moreover, Girkin expressed his opinion clearly. Girkin said during the winter we could not push the enemy back even 10 kilometers from Donetsk because we left Kherson. We retreated from the Kharkiv region. We turned back from near Kiev. I am not afraid to say that we are heading towards military defeat. In the early days of the invasion of Ukraine, Putin had the support of most, if not all, of the population. However, Putin's practices and defeats in the war shook the Russian people's trust in Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The injustices suffered by the soldiers in the army and the inhuman practices of the Russian commanders also demotivated the soldiers. Having lost the support of his people and the army, Putin was completely cornered by the sanctions imposed by Western and European countries. The Ukrainian army, which is getting stronger day by day with military aid, made history against the Russian invaders. Putin, who thought that the war would end in a few days, has lost about 200,000 soldiers and tons of ammunition so far. The losses of the Russian army since the day it started occupying Ukraine are as follows: 176,240 military personnel, 3,629 tanks, 7,005 armored combat vehicles, 2,707 artillery systems, 532 reactive spread fire systems, 288 air defense systems, 306 aircraft, 291 helicopters, 5,573 automotive and tank equipment, 18 military ships and boats, 911 cruise missiles, 2,283 unmanned aerial vehicles, 299 special machines for operational tactical missile systems. It seems difficult for Putin to continue the war with these losses because military personnel and ammunition are essential for success in the war. Putin is losing his soldiers and weapons one by one. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, continues to teach Russian invaders great lessons with their historic resistance. Zelensky, who is united with his army and his people, has won the admiration of almost the entire world for his fight for Ukraine's freedom. While Putin chose to be an occupier with his inhuman actions, Zelensky chose to be a hero with his determination and resistance. The facts are clearly visible.